The proceeding is currently suspended. 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 The proceeding is currently suspended.
Okay, so thank you for joining us for this next session. We're looking at the impact of coronavirus on universities and students. The work has been prompted by a petition calling for tuition fees to be reimbursed in light of both coronavirus and recent strike action by university staff, and it's received over 340,000 signatures. Sophie Quinn, who created the petition, is calling for students to be reimbursed tuition fees, and she told us that she hadn't gained the quality of education that she had in previous years, that the whole year had been completely disrupted. So today we're going to be asking the Minister what the government intends to do about that. And we're very grateful for the Minister for joining us today. And the Minister is also a former member of this committee and taking our questions. And we hope that she will appreciate the strength of feeling on this issue, why students, both current and those who are looking to start in September, are concerned about the value of the education that they're receiving and paying so much for as well. So before we start our questions, though, can I just ask the Minister to introduce herself?
Yeah, thank you very much, Catherine. I'm Michelle Donelan, the Minister for Universities.
Thank you very much. So the government enables UK students to go to university through the student loan system, which pays for tuition fees for over 90% of eligible students. So what role does the government have when it comes to protecting university students from being unreasonably disadvantaged by coronavirus, whether that's financially and educationally as well?
Yeah. So first of all, I want to start off by saying that coronavirus has obviously been had such an impact upon all sections and all sectors of our society. And I think the impact on students has been really stark. At a very vulnerable time in their lives, as well as important time in their lives in terms of education. They've had an extra pressure added onto them, and I'm very aware of that. So our role really is very different from what it is with schools, because universities are, via the UK law, autonomous organisations. However, my first sort of intervention when coronavirus hit was to write to every institution in England and almost remind them of their duty, especially to the most vulnerable students, international students, care leavers, etc., who really would be under even more pressure at this moment in time.
Okay, so in terms of there's obviously a well-being role there for the government, but I think the Minister would understand that one of the strongest messages that has come out from the evidence that we have gathered from students is that they find themselves in the position of being consumers now within the education market. Many have incurred significant levels of debt in order to invest in their education. But now that that service has been interrupted through strikes and also through this unprecedented pandemic that we are indeed all facing, they actually don't seem to have any rights to a refund or an ability to determine the level of service that they will now receive, which isn't what they have paid for or what they have incurred significant debt in order to obtain. So can the Minister understand that this is deeply frustrating for students? They've invested very heavily in their education and they've invested very heavily in the experiences that they were intending to have.
Yeah, no, definitely. And I can completely understand. I've had several conversations with students and student representatives, including the student union. But just to sort of clear up on this issue of fees, I don't think it's correct really to say that they don't have rights. They definitely do. They are eligible and have consumer rights, definitely within law and legal protection. So really on the issue of tuition fees, it is the universities, who are autonomous organisations, which set their own fees. The government sets the maximum level. They can then charge a lower level. They have that freedom to do so. And when universities decide to charge that full level, they will, of course, want to ensure that the courses are fit for purpose. They're going to allow students to progress to their qualifications. So a refund, as such, is really a matter for a university rather than the government. Whether a student is entitled to a refund is also dependent on their individual contractual relationship, and what they've signed up to do. But there is a process in place. I do want to sort of echo this and get that message out there. So if a student feels, as the Sophie that you reference feels, and I'm sure a number of other students do, and they've echoed this to me, and the message I've sent out is there is a process. So in the first instance, a student should go to their university, make a formal complaint, and all universities in line with consumer legislation do have to have that process in place and correspond with the student. Now, if they don't get to a satisfactory resolution, they can go to the office, the Office for Independent Adjudicator, which we've set up. So that office, what they do, they will then view that on a case-by-case basis and examine the situation. So has the university made appropriate changes? Have they delivered a sufficient quantity of course, etc.? All of those things will be examined on a case-by-case basis. And we saw that with the strikes. In fact, there were actually partial refunds made with the strikes. So that process is in place for students.
Okay, well, we'll come back on some of that, definitely. But I was just going to ask as well, what is the government? So, I mean, that makes it clear where you feel the government's role is in this, which isn't very extensive. But how is the government supporting? Yeah, sorry, go on.
I just want to say, though, I think it really is important that the process of examining whether they should have a fee refund or what's gone on should be independent, and that shouldn't be government going in there, because it does have to be done on a case-by-case basis. And we've seen so many innovative, fantastic examples of using technology and really working above and beyond by institutions. So it isn't fair to say that every student in this country has had a raw deal, because they haven't. So RADA, for example, who I spoke to the other week, have managed to put on an amazing courses for their students using technology, yet the very nature of their subjects would presume that they wouldn't be able to. So it's not the case that every student is in the situation that this petition highlights.
Okay. But in terms of students whose courses have been affected by coronavirus very significantly, and there are many in that situation, one of the things that has been raised with us that's a very practical thing that the government could do is that they're unable to claim universal credit because being in employment which isn't covered by coronavirus support schemes, and also not being able to exit tenancy agreements where they are in private rented student accommodation that they no longer need. And students appear to be falling through the net because they're neither employees who the government are supporting, nor really are they able to extract the support that they would normally get as students as well in this current situation. And what is the government doing to support students during this period?
Yeah, so I've worked very hard with the Student Loans Company to make sure that despite the impact of coronavirus on them as an organisation, that all student loans are delivered on time, which is the primary source of income for most students. Students are eligible if it's appropriate for the coronavirus job retention scheme. Obviously, that won't apply to all students, and we do appreciate that fact. But the key source of sort of hardship funding, if you like, is from universities themselves. So what we did quite early on in this process is work very close with the OFS so that they could loosen up some of the regulation around the access and participation money so that that can be accessed for universities. So that's been to the tune of 23 million for both April and May. We've also extended that for June and July. So universities can access that to enable them to have those hardship funds. So some of the things we advocated using it for were mental health support, technology, connectivity, money to help with accommodation or hardship, and all of those things. And on the accommodation point, A number of providers did give refunds to students, some didn't. But the key source for students, if they feel that they're in a financial hardship, is to go to those institutions who have, most of them already have those hardship funds, and we've, in a sense, bolstered them with more money so that they can assist those students.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to bring in Elliot now to ask some questions.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Minister. Notwithstanding the autonomy of universities and what we've discussed so far, I want to pick up on the issue of quality, which is something that was raised earlier. There has been a view, I think, expressed by the government and indeed by universities themselves that there is no need to give a reimbursement on tuition fees if the quality of the education is still there, notwithstanding the different way that it's now being delivered. But the survey that the Petitions Committee carried out found that 79% of respondents were either dissatisfied or very dissatisfied with the quality of the teaching that they were receiving. So I wondered if the government had made an assessment about the quality of university courses and the impact that coronavirus and indeed strikes have had on these.
Yeah, so at the heart of our policy is students and the best interest of students. They're the ones that are getting the most out of their education, and they're the ones that, as Catherine said before, are investing heavily in this education. So we originally set up the Office for Students for this very purpose, and they regulate. Now what they're doing at the moment is they're having a number of polls to identify problems around potentially quality or concerns, and then they've got a more focused approach to investigate. But we must remember as well, quality is a registration condition of a university. They can, in effect, have their degree awarding powers removed from them if there is a concern. And what the OFS do as well is they track the complaints via the Office for the Independent Adjudicator that I mentioned before to see if there are patterns around that. And the Office for Student have also invited students, third parties, parents, everybody to come forward and lodge those complaints as well. So in relation to the government's decision around tuition fees, we don't really have a decision here because, as I said before, institutions are autonomous. They don't have to charge the maximum fee if they don't want to, or they don't believe that they are providing that value. And there is the process in place if the student feels, actually, the quality is not here, or I'm not getting the volume of education that I should be getting.
Thank you for that, Minister. I think if we can carry on focusing on the actual courses and the way that education is being delivered to students at the moment, notwithstanding what you've just said. The engagement that we've been doing with the petitioners has identified that coronavirus appears to have had a greater impact on vocational and skills-based courses, particularly those from disadvantaged backgrounds and international students. The National Union of Students has told the Education Select Committee that 20% of student surveys couldn't even access online courses. So I wondered, again, notwithstanding what we've spoken about so far, if the government had been looking about how students from different circumstances, particularly those disadvantaged backgrounds that we've spoken about, have been affected by the outbreak.
Yeah, look, I really don't want to underestimate how severely students have been impacted by this virus, as every section of society and sector has. And it has been unprecedented and unexpected, and the ramifications have been stark. And universities, I believe, have risen to the challenge and really invested quickly in innovative technology. But I do take on board there are numerous students that are unhappy, and there will be circumstances where students, quite rightly, do feel that they haven't had the deal that they paid for, in effect. And that's why we've got the process in place so that that can be examined and looked at, and potentially they may get a partial refund. On the issue of more practical, vocational and creative subjects, they were always going to be trickier. I've spoken to a number of universities that have got round those challenges. QAA produced guidance to help support universities to meet those requirements, and also working with professional bodies so that their courses can be accredited and lead to those jobs that they're trying to achieve. The Office for Students also published more guidance. So I feel universities have had all the guidance and support to be able to put on those practical-based subjects, and it'll be a very different picture in the next academic year when we'll be looking at a much more blended type of learning than strictly online. And I do think one point to sort of land here is that online learning doesn't necessarily always mean inferior learning. In fact, sometimes it can mean superior learning, because you can utilise different types of technology. So whilst I completely agree with you, there are students that feel extremely upset and shortchanged out there. There are also students that that don't feel that way as well. So I think it's important to see both sides.
Okay.
Thank you, Minister. That's all from me, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. I guess picking up on those, because I totally appreciate there will be students that we have not heard from that are happy just to get their degree and they've managed to, get through this year as best as possible. But we have heard from a huge number of students for whom that is not the case, and they are left deeply unhappy with the situation. So you've already mentioned that students will have to take that up individually on a case-by-case basis with their university. But do you really think it's reasonable for what could potentially be 2.4 million students who are in university education to each be taking an individual action against their university to claim for the education that they believe they've paid for but they haven't received?
So I think that there are examples of innovative and fantastic technology and education, and it isn't true to say that all students in the country have not received an education for the last term of this academic year at all. And one of the things that we were very conscious of is we didn't want a gap in provision for those students, because that would be the worst case scenario. And one of the good things about all this is we haven't closed universities like we did schools and other sections of the economy and society. So students have continued to be able to learn, which is a very positive thing here. And yes, it was a different type of learning because this was an unexpected pandemic, not of the universities making, not of the government's making, and every country around the world has seen an impact on their HE sector and every section of society. And our universities have risen to that challenge. Now, there are a number of students that feel disgruntled and upset about what's happened over the last term, and I endorse their feelings to be able to do that. But what we need to do is have a look at those case-by-case scenarios, because there will be some students who have a very solid case and others that less so, because it also depends on the contract that they have with their individual institutions in terms of the law. So we have a process in place that can individually look at those cases. So I feel that is the most thorough and accurate way to be able to examine how much, if any, a student is entitled to in terms of their tuition fee refund.
So what evidence base does the government have about the quality of education that's currently being provided to university students?
So we have an independent body, the Office for Students, whose primary job is as a regulator of the sector. So there's obviously the minimum bar that is the registration condition in terms of quality. And every day OFS are monitoring the quality of HE. So they've invited complaints to come into them so that they can examine them on a daily basis, they've even said. They're doing polling, they're looking at all of those things. And that is the independent regulator. It's not the government's job, really, to be assessing whether there's quality or not there. That's why we set up the Office for Students, whose primary focus and whose primary customer, if you like, are the students.
But given we are being petitioned and the government are being petitioned to take action for those who are unhappy, do you have the statistics from the Office for Students as to the level of current satisfaction with university education?
So I spoke to the Office for Independent Adjudicator this week in terms of the number of complaints that they have received. It's obviously very early days because complaints can come in, I think it's up to a year afterwards. So there are a number of complaints in, but it's a very small number at the moment, but they anticipate more to come in. In terms of the OFS, I don't have the exact data on how many complaints they've received, but I can certainly ask them for that and then submit it.
That would be really helpful, thank you. That would help to inform the report that we're going to produce at the end of this inquiry, so thank you very much. I'm going now to ask, oh, sorry, I've got a technological glitch as to who's next on my list. Tonya, have you got some questions that you'd like to put to the Minister? Have you got a technological glitch? Yes, she does. There she is. You need to
back in the room. Is it me next? Sorry, Chair.
Yes, yes.
Right, sorry, I didn't hear a word you said. That's my own fault. I do apologise, Minister. Right, the President of Universities UK told us that individual students could complain to their universities if they weren't happy with their courses. And are we on So basically, the government's response to the petition request refunds or reimbursement has made it clear that this matter is for individual universities. What are the options available to students if they believe they're not receiving the standard of education they have the right to expect? And
so sorry, Tonya, I think
if I just in on Chris's question, I do apologise.
No, I was just going to say, because the question I was going to ask as well, that I realised I didn't ask you there, Minister, was one of the resolutions that the government are being asked to try and get the university to consider is supporting students' ability and right to retake the year and resit it where they feel this year has been so disrupted by not just coronavirus, but by strikes as well. I mean, is that something that the government's considering? And is there something that the government can do to try and assist and support that on behalf of the students? Not all of them will want it, but for those that do want that as a resolution.
Yeah, so in terms of current students, I think you're talking about with the option of deferring. So I do go back, I know I'm kind of labouring a point, but universities are different to schools, and we do need to frame our discussion around that. They are independent autonomous organisations in British law, so we don't have the legal power, in essence, to compel them to do that. However, we've got to also put it in perspective that they have had one term disruptive, which is completely understandable in terms of their grievances, etc. But I think if a student wanted to then resit a whole year or then defer, they'd have to look at the ramifications on their lives. And some universities are letting them do that. It's very true. Some are not, because of their sort of flow of students. So I think the first instance, a student should talk to their university, try and get their university to understand why they believe it would be in their best interest, but also to think about, if they did defer for a year, what are they going to do with that year as well, in essence? Because we are living in a strange time where international travel will be limited, jobs may be limited, etc. So I do want students to really consider their options, because I'd like them to do something that's in their best interest and not delay their lives as well and their progression into the labour market at the end of their degree.
Could I also just put another challenge to you, Minister, that I know you have referred on a number of occasions to the fact that universities are independent businesses and that each individual student needs to resolve the issues that they have with their independent university. But isn't it the reality, though, that for these students, this is not a genuine marketplace? They can't just pick up their stuff and go somewhere else and choose another organisation if they're not happy with what the university is offering. Is it not, aren't there sort of uneven strength of arms here in terms of these negotiations? And really, doesn't the government have a role to play when it has intervened so significantly to support so many businesses, and quite rightly so, during this unprecedented pandemic, that actually students feel that they've been forgotten in this, because really they don't have the right to take their business elsewhere. They have to accept what's given in these circumstances, and that, I think, is what's causing such grave concern.
Yeah, so first of all, I don't want any student to feel that they've been forgotten. They certainly haven't. Our primary goal is to ensure that their institutions can survive and thrive throughout this process and afterwards. That's why we introduced a stabilisation package on the 4th of May, because primarily we need to stabilise the sector and ensure that their institutions continue so they can get their education that they've invested in and that they expected. And secondly, we have supported students with the maintenance loans continuing, but also with the additional support in terms of hardship funding. And we're monitoring the situation daily, really. I talk to the student union on a regular basis. I have regular engagement with students. I'm looking at doing more in terms of mental health with the Office for Students. So it is not true that we've forgotten students. It's just a very different setup than it is in schools and other parts of the education system in the UK.
Yeah, and the genuinely private sector as well. And I think that's the difficulty, that these fall between education and private employers, and it falls somewhere in between, which I think is what is presenting such a challenge to the current student cohort. But I know Tonya was going to come in and ask specifically about some of those challenges that the universities are facing as a result of this crisis as well.
Yeah, apologies, Chair. So the government has taken exceptional action to mitigate the financial impact of coronavirus on workers and business. We know that, providing billions of pounds in grants. Isn't there a case for taking similar action in respect of students who have lost out educationally?
Yeah, so we have done a great deal economically and for every sector, including the university sector, up to it's estimated 700 million in terms of government loans and support. And in terms of students, I think I'll have to sort of repeat some of the comments I've already made around the fact that they're continuing to get the maintenance loans. Universities haven't closed; they're still getting education. If they have concerns around that education, there's a process in place. We've bolstered universities' ability to enhance their hardship funds by the tune of 23 million for 4 months, which is very substantial in that amount. And my first letter to the sector was student focused. It was reminding them of their obligations to really look after their students, especially in terms of mental health support and the most vulnerable amongst their student bodies. And that continues to be my conversations with the sector and ensuring that that is happening on the ground. So whilst they are autonomous organisations, both the OFS and myself are making sure that students are at the forefront of their aims and decisions.
It could have a massive impact on the universities because if they're taking individual claims against them, it appears that the coronavirus could cost universities about 2.5 billion in fees and teaching grant income. And then given that, is there a case for students to be reimbursed? And what support will the government provide to avoid universities being put into that financially precarious position? Because while the individual will have to go and claim their money back, that's going to have an impact on so many of them.
Yeah, so I think it is fair to say, to reinforce the fact that there has been examples of innovative and fantastic use of technology over the last few months, so I don't envisage every student in England or Wales coming forward and seeking a refund on their tuition fees, and they might not even be eligible, and that is a decision for the Office for the Independent Adjudicator as to how much of a proportion, etc., they would be eligible for. But in terms of the financial strain on universities, that's why we introduced the stabilisation package on May the 4th, which did include that 700 million of support, so things like the coronavirus job retention scheme, access to the government business loans. We brought forward 100 million from QR funding. We brought reprofiled tuition fees to 2.6 billion, so that was helping with the cash flow situation. So all of those things were designed to stabilise the sector, and there's almost, if you like, a safety net that we built in. So we said in that package that we would have a process called a structured transformation process, where if an institution has gone through all of those hoops, done all of those things, and is still suffering severely financially, they could enter into this structured transformation process. So we are very much putting the health of institutions and their longevity at the forefront of our work, because I, for one, fully appreciate the challenges and the impact that coronavirus has really had upon them and will continue to have. And that's why I have so many calls with stakeholders every day. And I know that the OFS are regularly monitoring the financial health and report to me on a weekly basis as to what is happening on the ground and if we have any severe issues to worry about in terms of timeframes around certain institutions.
Many institutions depend on research and also on international students, and with the sustainability in the coming year with the potential loss of students and the inability to do the research because of coronavirus, is it possible that many courses and institutions are going to be at risk regardless of what the government has put in place?
So you're quite right. There is a cross-subsidisation between international students and research. So in addition, that package also announced a cross-ministerial task force on research. We've had 3 meetings now of that, which also includes DA representation, and it's really solutions focused. And I think that's a really productive task force that is helping with that agenda. I also know that BEIS are working cross-government on the research agenda to try and give the sector more solutions to enable to fix this issue that you've identified. Because moving out of a coronavirus Britain, if you like, our research base will be more important than ever before in the sort of building back of our economy and our society, and we fully appreciate that. On the other topic that you referenced, international students, that's really my top priority at the moment, because at the moment they are predictions, they're not a reality. We still have a window of opportunity to attract those international students to come and study into the UK. And my message is based on fact, that the UK is open and ready for business, that we're flexible, that we have innovative online learning, but it's going to be, in most parts, a blended learning that's on offer from September onwards. And I'm working with the Home Office to try and ensure that we're as flexible as we possibly can be in terms of our visa regulations, so that we're not actually putting up any barriers to these international students. And I'm working very hard on communications in those markets as well, so that we can really land those messages to the students that are looking to see what country they should study in this coming academic year.
Well, thanks for that, Minister. But on the point of the task force, and it's had 3 meetings, I believe, as you said, will you be able to feed back to the committee the outcomes or the aims, the objectives and the outcomes of the task force? Because I think that would feed in very well to this inquiry.
Yes, yeah, I mean, I couldn't see why not. I better clear it with my co-chair, Amanda Soloway, but I can't see why not. And that's a very reasonable request. So I will chat to her, and I'm sure I can get you that information.
Okay, thank you very much, Minister.
Thanks, Minister. So I'm going to bring Martin in, who's got a few questions for you now.
Yes, thank you. Just but before I start on my own questions, I just wondered if I could follow up on one of the points you made in the last questions about the flexibility for the international students with visas. Now, obviously, a number of them would be looking to perhaps retake the year that's been messed up. Is there flexibility there to support the future visa applications, which will obviously run for a longer period?
Yeah, so these are the issues that we are examining with the Home Office, and our priority across government is to be as flexible and as accommodating, obviously in a safe way that we can be, to international students, so that we can ensure that they continue to study here and access some of the world's finest institutions and courses.
Okay, thanks. We've heard a few times now that the government's view is that it's a matter for the individual universities if there's to be any refunds, and that there's no consideration really being given to a reduction in student debt. Now, is it fair that students whose education has been so dramatically affected by these external events will be leaving university with the same level of student debt as previous and future years did, but with a potentially substandard quality of education?
So I would argue the impacts of coronavirus are not fair on anyone, and nor were they anticipated or expected. So they're not fair on any section of society or sector of society. And there will be cases where students haven't received the right level of quality of support. I'm confident of that. And that's why we have a process in place. That's what happened during the strikes. There were partial refunds administered. I don't think it's true that across the board that has been the situation at all. But there is a process in place for those students. But nothing about this virus or the impacts of this virus are fair in any way.
No. Now, obviously, by reducing student debt, the government could reduce the financial burden to students wanting to retake a year because of the coronavirus situation, and recognise that many students haven't had this experience that they would have expected and indeed paid for. Would you commit to reconsidering this?
So I think we do need to be realistic in terms of what we've just been through, the asks that have been on our Treasury, the commitments have already been made to every sector of the economy in terms of what can be delivered. And when we look at what's happened with students, we've managed to have a situation in this country, which hasn't been the case in every country, where we haven't closed universities. They've still continued to get an education. You know, there hasn't been a gap in their education, which isn't true of a actual, oh, am I back?
Yeah, you're fine.
I'm back. All right, well, I'll just keep talking. I don't know where I was when it cut out. I was saying that I think we have to remember that unlike other countries, some of the other countries, we didn't close our universities. The students still continue to get an education. There was no disruption in terms of gaps of provision, which is unlike other sectors of our own education system in this country. And they have still continued to get their maintenance loans, and we have enhanced their hardship funding. And if there is a problem in terms of their individual cases, there is a process in place to get those refunds.
Thank you. You mentioned there the increase in the hardship funding. I think earlier you said a 23 million sum over the next 4 months. Now, obviously, we're in a moving feast and things are changing all the time with this crisis. But the Scottish Government, by comparisons, announced bringing forward 11.4 million for its hardship fund. How does the hardship fund in England compare with that?
Yeah. So I talk to my DA counterparts weekly, sometimes daily, during this coronavirus pandemic. So I'm fully aware. I spoke to my counterpart Richard Lockhead this week, so I'm fully aware of the Scottish plans. What we've done is we've allowed more flexibility around the funding. So it's 23 million per month. So we did it in April, 23 million in May, 23 million in June, and 23 million in July. Now, I believe what the Scottish Government have done is move forward funding from August earlier. We could have done that, but then we also appreciate the fact that this virus is going to have ramifications that last for months, if not years, especially around things like mental health and other support that students will need additionally in the next term. So we wouldn't want to sort of rob Peter to pay Paul, in effect, if you like.
Okay.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, Martin. So in terms of looking to the future, Universities UK has published principles for universities emerging from lockdown, which makes it clear that students arriving at or returning to university in September will have a very different experience to the one that they might have been expecting when they applied or when they were there previously. What's the government doing? And I know you've referenced some of this, but specifically to make sure that universities are providing the quality of education that students expect and are entitled to, and indeed can be of the standard and the quality that attract the same level of students to maintain that vibrancy of the system and international students as well. Yeah,
so I think the most important thing at the moment is to give students the certainty and for institutions to be fully transparent on what they can expect. So they can make those decisions about whether to go to university, which course to do, which institution to go to, because before before self-release comes up, they have that opportunity actually to change their mind even about the institution and the course. So we published guidance last week where we were very clear that institutions need to provide that transparency around what their course will look like in terms of the blended offering. Obviously, it's all caveated because it depends on if something changed in terms of Public Health England guidance and the virus, that could very much change that. But at the moment, give the students as much information as they possibly can. OFS did the same thing. So they published consumer protection advice this week, which outlines the same requirement on institutions to do that. So the students starting in the next academic year will be in a different scenario to the ones in the last, because they will obviously have more information of what to expect and how their course will be structured, and it will be much more blended in nature rather than solely online. Also, I think it's fair to say institutions will have had months to prepare for this now, so the expectation of what they can deliver will be much higher, and we are expecting much more innovation, much more reliance on technology that will really help provide these courses. So it will be a different picture for students starting in the next academic year.
So, I mean, so one of the things that has been put to us is that, you know, if students are facing a lower quality of education or something different that they're not expecting or it doesn't appeal to them in the same way, to what extent is the government encouraging the deferral, that people can choose to take a deferral and hope that within 12 months the landscape might be more back to normal, or indeed offer a reduction in fees? And is the government doing anything to support universities in order to do that? And I was just as you were talking, an analogy came into mind. You know, if you look, for example, at the moment, I don't know if you've got a gym membership, but you know, I'm aware that gyms can't provide the same level of service. You can't go to the gym. The government have mandated that that's not possible, and therefore I think most gyms will have frozen their fees for this period. And then now, whilst a limited number of online services are offered, or perhaps outdoor activities only, they're providing a reduced fee structure. Now that's a private business, which obviously universities are also. So I guess the question begs, why are universities not offering a more flexible and a more consumer-focused funding structure as whilst it carries out these adjustments in the way it's delivering its services in the same way that other private businesses are having to do?
Yeah, so I think the best person to ask for that would be the universities themselves. That's their ability to do that. I can't mandate them to do that or in any way decide for them. They have that freedom to do that within law. As I said at the beginning, we only set the maximum in terms of the fee level. In some of my conversations that I've had with universities, they would argue that online is not necessarily a cheaper provision. In this country, we didn't have institutions that were already geared up en masse to provide online teaching. So they've had to invest in technology at a rapid speed and to be able to deliver that quality. So I think they would argue that online doesn't necessarily mean cheaper, and also that online doesn't necessarily mean inferior as well, which is a point that I made earlier on. In relation to your first point around deferrals, my personal message to any student thinking about this would be to really think about what's in their best interest. What are they going to use that year for if they defer? As we said before, they're probably not going to be able to travel. The labour market will be precarious. Do they really want to delay their academic studies when we have now got institutions that have spent even longer perfecting their online offer? It won't be solely online in the new term from the majority of providers. They've said that it's going to be a blended offer with some online and some in person. And we're advocating and encouraging universities to make sure that the support is there in terms of mental health and also in terms of pastoral care, and that they're thinking about the student experience. I think something that we've not touched on is that a number of students also go to university wanting that the student experience, the social life, the soft skills that they build, the networks, the connections, and it's universities' jobs to find innovative ways to be able to get round the barriers that we have at the moment, to be able to facilitate that.
I mean, I guess I used your language in referring to universities as private businesses. But in reality, sorry, go on.
Autonomous organisations.
Autonomous organisations. Okay, okay, yeah, that's an important clarification, because in a sense they are. We've already discussed the financial challenges faced by the university sector and some of the practical challenges posed by the current situation that, of course, we're pleased you're working with the Home Office to resolve some of those issues. But in reality as well, our universities are absolutely core to our local and regional economies, and they perform a huge role within the public sector in partnership with the private sector, and they are, very much constrained by the ability to obtain public funding, whether that's for research and development, and also constrained by the fee structure as set by the government. So, I mean, is there not more that the government can do to support the universities through this crisis, which in turn will enable universities to be able to support their students better?
Yeah. So the package that we announced on May the 4th was actually in response to what the sector themselves had asked us for. So there were student number controls that the sector themselves had called for, primarily via the mechanism of UUK, the largest sector body, in order to stabilise the system. And that has students at the heart of it, because we had a situation where, for instance, 1 week before all that happened, we had 30,000 unconditional offers made by institutions, mainly that never made unconditional offers before. So putting a number of pressures on students to make decisions quickly, which were not necessarily in their best interests. The package also, as I said before, did free up £700 million worth of support in terms of the business loans, the access to the job retention scheme, etc. We have reprofiled the tuition fees for 2.6 billion. We've moved forward 100 million of QR funding. So we've been trying to really help with stability of the sector, assisting with the cash flow problems of the sector. And then we're working on some of the longer term problems. So trying to ensure that we can mitigate any potential loss in international students. We have the safety net there for with the structured transformation system. And we're also trying to deal with the research issues with the task force. And I said that BEIS are working closely on this, cross-government as well, to try and look at the problem and see for more solutions. And we had the 100 million in the announcement that was reprofiled in terms of QR funding. And another thing that the package announced was actually the fact that students haven't had that same level of pastoral and tutorial time over the last few months with teachers and advisors. And so we have bolstered clearing to add a new section called Clearing Plus, where if they self-release, they then also get proactive communications in terms of what their results would leave them eligible for in terms of institutions and courses. So really trying to put students' interests at the heart of this and at the forefront of our agenda in what is very, very difficult times. And with all the support that you have mentioned across other sections of society, I think it's fair to say that coronavirus will still have an impact and a ripple, because this has been an awful experience for everybody. And my heart does go out to every student that has been affected.
I just wanted to finish with something which our petitioner, Sophie, said in her testimony, which did stand out for me. She said that her intake in their final year are really concerned about the job market and graduate schemes, which is challenging at the best of times, as we know, and they don't want to be written off as a coronavirus graduate year, and for employers to feel like this year group has somehow been handed grades rather than completing the year for them, which we know isn't the case. And what consideration has the government given to the graduate job market this year, and what support could be given to graduates? It's not just in their role as students at the moment, but as they move forward into this brave new world.
Yes, so I think this is a really important topic, in fact, because we have seen the reports about what could be to come from the Treasury themselves in terms of the economy. And I think this is going to be very worrying for students at what has been already a very difficult time, and their job prospects will be forefront of their mind. So this is something that I'm currently working on. I've spoken to UK and commissioned them to come to me with their ideas on the subject as well, and how we can really work with our institutions to ensure that the support is there. We've seen institutions already rising to this challenge. Some of them have been doing online forums with work-related skills and interview skills, etc. But I do think there is more that we can do within this space, and it's something that I am working on. And should we get more details added before your report is written, I shall write to you with those.
Okay, well, thank you very much. And thank you for joining us today. We do appreciate you taking the time to be here and answering the questions from us that are very much guided by the petitioners. And we realise, this is a complex issue, but I think the resounding message that we have had from students is that many of them don't feel like they're getting value for money in their education. They feel that they now face fewer opportunities as a result of this crisis, and they feel a bit ignored and caught in the middle between universities who provide their education and the government who pay for it up front. And they have this challenge of being consumers but being unable to vote with their feet, because they have already paid for the service that they feel they're not getting in return. And I appreciate you've given all the responses on that, but we will use the information that you've given us today to inform our report, and we very much hope that we have made the voice of the petitioners heard during the session today and through the report that we'll produce. So thank you very much for your time today, Minister.
Right, thank you, and I've very much enjoyed the session, and I think it was very useful to talk about the perspectives of students, which I try to liaise with every week, but I think there are a number of concerns up and down the country, so hopefully it will provide comfort to those that didn't know about the processes already in place, and any that do have concerns, I urge them to take up those processes, as I do any student that writes to me.
Okay, thank you very much. Order, order.
The proceeding has ended. The proceeding has ended. The proceeding has ended.